I was part of a 6-person expedition to the South Pole. I was the only one to make it back alive. By Drunken Swordsman. Growing up, I was always drawn to adrenaline, extremity, and testing my limits. I started out doing relatively common stuff, bungee jumping, parachuting, mountain climbing. But like a junkie needing a greater high, I always wanted something more. I gathered a group of like-minded friends through my adventuring. There were 5 of us, 2 girls named Katie and Lena, 2 guys called David and Jake, and me, Adam. Together we moved on to more dangerous activities, base jumping, cave diving, things like that. 3 years ago, we had what we thought was a great idea. We would go skiing in the South Pole. It didn't take long for us to agree on the trip. Only Lena was against it, not liking the remoteness of the continent, but it didn't take much for us to persuade her. Soon we were all planning, saving up money and researching. On November 6th, we stepped off a hired plane at Hercules Inlet, a bay in the southwest of Antarctica, and the beginning point of our 50-day ski trek. Waiting for us was our guide, Leif Steensen. Jake had picked Leif personally. He had been recommended by one of Jake's traveler friends, who had also hired the Norwegian as a guide on an Antarctic trip. He struck me as a gruff, silent man. "Hey there!" Jake called out as we approached him, hauling our packs and skis behind us. "You must be Leif, right?" "Yes," he said curtly. His voice was heavily accented. "And you are Jake?" "The very same," my friend smiled. He was a likable and friendly guy, in stark contrast to Leif's disconnected manner. We made our introductions, and our guide immediately got down to business. "There are a few basic rules you must follow in order to stay safe. Obey my commands at all times. Do not wander off from the party. Do not walk away from camp." "Will we get a handbook?" Katie laughed. She was the joker of the group. Leif looked at her icily. "No. No handbook. You remember, or you don't go at all." Katie stopped laughing quick. After Leif had finished his briefing, we set out at last. I can't even begin to describe the scenery. Nothing I've ever seen quite compares to it. Flat, endless ice sheets, spreading out as far as the eye could see, like a sea of snow. It was undeniably beautiful. It also pressed home the reality that we were alone out here, with no humans for possibly hundreds of miles. If anything were to go wrong on this trip, it could be deadly. I loved every second of it. As we skied northeast, I strayed out of line and fell in beside David. He was the most like Leif among our group, quiet and reserved, at least until he got to know people. "So, when are you going to ask Leif out?" I grinned at him. "Shut the fuck up, Adam," he laughed back at me. "I will say, though, that the way you shut up Katie was glorious. Wish more people could do that." Katie shot us a withering glare from in front of us. We both snickered. "Not like there's many coffee shops out here anyway," I sighed. "Your date will have to wait some time, it seems." After some hours of traveling northeast, Leif's voice carried over to us from the front of the column. "We stop here for now. Unpack your tents." As we took off our skis and began setting up camp, I wandered over to Lena. "So, how do you like it so far?" "It's beautiful here, I'll give you that," Lena answered. "But like I said before, it's so barren, so massive. I can't help but feel small and meaningless, like a fly on a wall." "I'm sure you'll be fine," I said, putting a hand on her shoulder. "In a month we'll reach the Thiel Mountains. That should break the monotony a bit." Lena was about to answer, but then stopped, squinting over my shoulder at something in the distance. "Adam, what's that?" I turned around, looking over the expanse of the snow. "What? I can't see anything." I finally noticed what she was pointing out. From far away on the horizon, something was sticking out of the ice, grey and unmoving. It was too far away to tell what it could possibly be. I called over to our guide. "Hey, Leif, you got a second?" He came over to us, his bearded face stern as always. "Yes, what is it, Adam?" "Any idea what that is?" I said, pointing to the faraway object. He stroked his beard and thought. I do not know. Rocks, perhaps? It's riffling the way we're going, said Jake, walking over from his pack. He smiled winningly. Maybe we could go check it out tomorrow. What do you think, Leaf? Up for an adventure? Leaf seemed uncomfortable with the suggestion. I don't know if that's a good idea. We need to keep up a good pace. Jake's right. It's roughly the way we're going anyway, said Lena. Come on, it may be something interesting. Leaf sighed. Fine. Tomorrow. Probably just rocks, I would say. My first night in Antarctica was sobering. Even in my tent, dressed up warmly, I could still feel the cold. Thankfully, after some time, my breathing warmed up the tent, and I fell into a deep sleep. 8 hours later, Leif woke us up to break camp and set out again. As I was eating a small breakfast of freeze-dried cheese and chocolate, I saw Katie looking at the grey objects on the horizon. She looked strangely confused. What's up, Katie? I asked, walking over. Slept well? Those things, were they to the north when we set up the camp? I frowned, trying to remember. I think so, yeah, why? They're to the east now. I paused, confused. Are you sure you didn't just get turned around? No, I checked the compass. It's definitely to the west. I frowned again. I guess we misremembered then. We were tired after all. Yeah, must have been that, Katie said absently, her mind elsewhere. Wonder what those things are, anyway. Guess we'll go find out soon. After eating and packing up, we put on our skis and set out, heading towards the strange things on the horizon. Leaf seemed slightly troubled, and I wondered if he too had misremembered the direction they were in. As we got closer, we could make out what the things were. A circle of massive rectangular stones, standing on their side. They reminded me instantly of Stonehenge. Approaching them, David fell in beside Leaf. I thought Antarctica never had indigenous population, he said. Who could have made something like this? Our guide appeared perplexed. I will be honest with you. I do not know. I've never seen anything quite like this before. I thought you said you'd been through this part of the continent before. I have, but I did not encounter this. It is irregular. We should take a closer look. Katie grinned back at our guide. Good to see you've warmed up to our little adventure, Leaf. We approached the circle cautiously. Up close, we could see that the stones had once had carvings of some sort on them, although they had long been destroyed by wind and time. In the center of the circle was a low, square slab of stone. 4 grooves ran from its center to each corner. What the hell? Whispered Lena. How did this even get here? Aliens? Smiled Katie. Isn't that always the answer? I walked over to the central stone. It was dark, about knee-height, and featureless. For some reason, it made me strangely uneasy, though I couldn't pinpoint why. I touched it, hesitantly. It was completely smooth, unlike the rest of the circle. We should continue, Leaf called out. We have a timetable to fulfill. We can write down the coordinates and, once we return, tell someone who will know what to do with this discovery. Slowly, our group pulled back together, and we set out again, the expanse stretching out around us, completely featureless, and I was glad we had an experienced guide like Leaf. Every so often, he would take out a compass and check our heading, making slight adjustments every time. I slept better on our second stop, knowing that the cold would get better eventually. I talked with Lena before we went on, and she confessed that the stone circle made her feel very uneasy as well. It shouldn't be here, she said firmly. This place hasn't had any native people. Ever. It's only scientists and tourists. And why would they possibly make something like this? Maybe Katie's right, I smiled. Aliens? Lena groaned theatrically. You're all just underestimating how important this discovery could be. Maybe we've accidentally stumbled upon proof that the history of this continent was completely different. I hope not. I don't want my name in history books being my legacy. We both laughed, the unease of the situation relenting somewhat. When I woke, I could tell something was wrong. I could hear hushed voices talking outside my tent. I climbed outside, rubbing my gritty eyes. Leaf, Lena, David, Katie, and Jake stood in a huddle in the middle of our campsite. They were talking quietly and casting furtive glances to the west. I looked over to where they were looking. On the horizon, far away, I could see a familiar circle of grey stones. A chill ran down my spine. I walked over to my friends. "How is this possible?" I asked incredulously. "Those things should be to the south of us. They shouldn't even be close enough for us to see them." Leaf silenced me with a gesture. "We've been talking about it, Adam. The only logical explanation is this is a second circle. It is strange, to say the least. I've never heard of stone circles in Antarctica, let alone two." "Do we go investigate it?" "No," replied Leaf resolutely. "Yesterday's detour already put us off our timetable. We must press on. I will write down these coordinates, and we will pass them on to the experts later." We packed up and set off. A strange hush had fallen over our group. The second circle had affected us strangely. I could tell the others were disconcerted by them now, not just me and Lena. During the day's hike, I only talked once with Katie. I was hoping her joking attitude would help me relax. "So, aliens, huh?" I said, skiing next to her. "That a professional opinion?" She grinned at me, but I could tell she was troubled. "It's obvious, isn't it?" she answered jokingly. "What else could it be?" "Maybe Leaf put them there to scare us." "Did you see him looking at them?" He was confused too, suddenly serious. "And he's been through here before. How come he didn't see it?" "Maybe it was snowed under," I guessed. I've read that the landscape can change a lot here. Our conversation trailed off, and we remained silent till we broke camp again. Before I went to sleep, I noticed David scanning the horizon. It was a clear day, and we could see miles away. "What are you looking at?" I asked, walking over to him. "Snow and ice?" "I'm making sure there's no bloody stone circles around here," David replied. I laughed, but he didn't join in. I went to bed, once again feeling uneasy. A commotion in the camp awoke me suddenly. I tore out of my tent, not even getting out of my sleeping gear. David was shouting, cursing. "What's happening? What's going on?" I yelled. David stood on the edge of our camp, gesticulating wildly at the western horizon. My heart missed a beat when I saw what he was cursing at. A circle of grey rocks. My friends came out of their tents, confused and sleepy. Their confusion quickly turned to an uncertain fear. "How's this possible?" "I don't know," said Leaf. Even he seemed troubled, and he kept checking his compass, as if confirming over and over that the rocks were indeed in that direction. I was about to suggest we go investigate, but David cut me off. "Where's Katie?" We stood in silence for a second, turning, looking around. Leaf ran over to Katie's tent and unzipped it. It was empty. Not even her sleeping bag remained. Our group fell silent for a second. No one knew what to say, what to do. Leaf broke the silence. "There are footprints here." Looking closer, I saw he was right. Booted footprints were impressed in the snow, going from the tent entrance, around it, and away from the camp. We followed after them. Soon, Lena threw her hands up in frustration. "What the fuck?" she exclaimed. "What the fuck is going on?" Peering past her, I could see what had angered her. The footprints stopped. Suddenly, and without any warning, it was as if Katie had suddenly flown straight up into the air. We gathered around the place they ended. Jake cleared his throat. "Leaf?" he began. "What's the plan, man? What's your next move?" Leaf was silent for a second, staring at the abruptly ending footprints. Then he looked at Jake. "We have to search for her. She has to be here somewhere. We will spread out into a line and..." He trailed off as something on the ground caught his eye. I looked down. Our movement had upset the snow, showing ice beneath. It was oddly clear, almost like frozen glass. Through it, we could see something red, a piece of fabric, frozen deep below the surface. Leaf cleared his throat abruptly. "Clear the snow below us." We set to work moving the snow with our gloved hands. Soon we could see what lay beneath. Jake cursed savagely and Leaf crossed him. My breath stopped short as I realized what I was seeing. Frozen solid in the ice below, lying in her bag as if she was still asleep, was Katie.